You can tell a good director in about 5 minutes. Doesn't take longer. If you've been around at all, you spot a director in 5 minutes.
Richard Widmark wasn't just an actor. He was a living legend of Hollywood's golden age. His powerful performances helped define an entire era of cinema. But behind the glamour and fame was a man who faced countless struggles. From a small town in Minnesota to the dazzling spotlight of Hollywood, Richard Widmark's journey was anything but easy. Do you know what he had to overcome to achieve success? If not, you're in the right place. Hi, I'm Mr. Heyman, and today we're going to uncover the 5 actors Richard Widmark absolutely hated. But before we begin, if you're a fan of Richard Widmark or love classic Western films, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any fascinating stories behind the scenes. We bring you untold stories of Western legends and the timeless stars of classic Hollywood. Richard Widmark's story begins in the quiet little town of Sunrise, Minnesota. But his family didn't stay there for long. Within a year, they packed up and moved to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where his father, Carl Henry Widmark, took on a new job as a traveling salesman. Soon after settling there, Richard's mother, Ethel May, gave birth to his younger brother, Donald, on July 25, 1918. The two brothers formed a strong bond from an early age, a bond that would last their entire lives. Richard often said that his love for movies came from his Scottish grandmother, a devoted fan of cowboy legend Tom Mix. She would take little Richard to the local cinema 2 or 3 times a week, starting when he was just 4 years old. Those magical trips sparked a passion for film that would never fade. Because of Carl's work, the Widmark family moved often, but they eventually settled in Princeton, Illinois. There, Carl opened a small bakery called Henry's Bakery, and the family lived in the apartment above it. For the first time, they had a real place to call home. Richard attended Princeton High School, where he excelled both in class and on the football field, even becoming class president in his senior year. However, life took a difficult turn during his junior year when his parents separated. Ethel chose to stay in Princeton to raise Richard and his brother until they finished school. After graduating in 1932, Richard earned a scholarship to Lake Forest College, where he planned to study law. He continued playing football, won 3rd place in a statewide speech competition, and gradually found himself drawn to the stage. Though he was hesitant to admit it at first, afraid people might laugh at his love for acting, his passion only grew stronger. Everything changed when he met Aurora Jean Hazelwood, a fellow drama student with the same dream of performing. She would become the love of his life. Richard graduated in 1936 and was soon invited to stay at Lake Forest College to assist with drama and speech classes, marking the beginning of a journey that would lead him straight to Hollywood spotlight. After spending 2 years teaching at Lake Forest, Richard Widmark decided it was time to chase a bigger dream. In 1938, he packed his bags and headed straight for New York City, hoping to break into radio after a friend offered him a chance. Coincidentally, the love of his life, Jean Hazelwood, was also in New York, studying at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. It didn't take long for Richard to start landing roles in radio dramas like a Jenny's real-life stories. Before he knew it, his days were spent dashing between studios, his career finally gaining momentum. Then came April 5, 1942, a day Richard would never forget. Just months after the U.S. entered World War II, he and Jean tied the knot in her hometown of Evanston, Illinois. Richard often said that after meeting Jean, he never so much as flirted with another woman. "I happen to like my wife a lot," he once said with a grin. Their marriage would go on to last 55 years, a rare Hollywood love story untouched by scandal. When war broke out, Richard tried to enlist in the military, but a perforated eardrum kept him out. His younger brother Donald, however, was drafted and sent to Europe. In 1943, tragedy struck. Donald's plane was shot down over the Netherlands. He was the only member of his crew to survive, but he spent more than a year in a German prison camp. Though he eventually made it home, his health never fully recovered. Years of headaches and partial paralysis followed, and in 1955, at just 37 years old, Donald passed away from a brain tumor. Richard, who had done everything he could to care for his brother, often said the government never truly understood the pain Donald endured. Meanwhile, Back in 1943, while Richard and Jean worried about their loved ones overseas, his own career began to take shape. He made his Broadway debut in Kiss and Tell and joined the American theater wing to perform for troops, all while earning a solid living from radio and stage work. 2 years later, in 1945, Richard and Jean welcomed their only child, a daughter named Heath Widmark, born on July 25. Not long after, fate came calling. 20th Century Fox executive Darryl F. Zanuck offered Richard the role of Tommy Udo, a cold-blooded killer in the film Kiss of Death starring Victor Mature. But director Henry Hathaway wasn't convinced. He thought Richard's intelligent look and high forehead made him too refined to play a murderer. Zanuck stood firm, and Richard got the part, though Hathaway made the shoot a challenge from day one. Ironically, Richard only accepted the role because the film was being shot in New York. That decision changed his life forever. In his very first movie, and in his very first scene, Richard Widmark created one of Hollywood's most haunting moments. As Tommy Udo, he pushed an elderly woman in a wheelchair down a flight of stairs, unleashing a maniacal laugh that sent chills down audiences' spines. The scene became legendary, earning him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor and a Golden Globe for Most Promising Newcomer. It was the moment that transformed a radio voice from Minnesota into a Hollywood icon. Richard Widmark once joked, "I thought this acting thing was easy, I haven't won anything since." But behind that humor was a bit of honesty. He later admitted that the first time he saw himself on the big screen, he was horrified. "I felt like shooting myself," he confessed. Yet, while Richard struggled to accept his own performance, audiences couldn't get enough. They loved to hate his character in Kiss of Death, and his chilling portrayal made him an instant sensation. Impressed by his impact, 20th Century Fox offered him a 7-year contract, even though Richard had originally signed a terrible deal just to secure the Tommy Udo role. In 1948, his career continued to rise as he starred alongside Gregory Peck and Ann Baxter in Yellow Sky. That same year, he appeared in Roadhouse with Celeste Holm and The Street with No Name with Lloyd Nolan and Barbara Lawrence. The following year, he teamed up with Lionel Barrymore in Down to the Sea in Ships, further cementing his reputation as one of Hollywood's most promising new stars. By 1950, the studio trusted him with 2 major projects. The first was Panic in the Streets, directed by his old Broadway friend Elia Kazan, the very man who had once encouraged him to audition for Kiss of Death back in 1947. Although the film featured talents like Jack Palance and Zero Mostel, it struggled at the box office due to the high costs of filming on location in New Orleans. Next came No Way Out, a bold and racially charged drama co-starring Sidney Poitier and Linda Darnell. Richard played Ray Biddle, a violent racist, a role he initially refused to take. But under pressure from the studio, he reluctantly agreed. After each intense scene, Richard would turn to Poitier and apologize, saying, "Sid, you know this is just acting, right?" Poitier would simply smile and reply, "Dick, I get it. I'm an actor, too." The two went on to form a deep friendship, and years later, Sidney revealed that Richard was the first person in Hollywood ever to invite him to dinner, a simple gesture that meant more to him than words could express. Before we move deeper into Richard Widmark's story, let's pause for a moment and talk about one of his most iconic film periods. In 1951, he starred in The Halls of Montezuma, a gripping World War II film set on a Japanese-held island. The cast included his old radio friend Carl Malden, along with Jack Palance, Richard Boone, and a young Robert Wagner, who earned his very first credited role in that movie. Then, in 1952, Richard shared the screen with none other than Marilyn Monroe in Don't Bother to Knock. Reflecting on the experience, he once described Marilyn as a fragile soul, like a wounded bird. She longed for fame but was terrified of the world around her. On set, she often locked herself in her dressing room for hours, while the crew waited anxiously for her to come out. Remembering her lines was a constant struggle, and during filming, her performance seemed chaotic. But once the film was edited and shown on the big screen, something magical happened. Marilyn shone. She looked radiant, vulnerable, and unforgettable. Even Richard had to admit, when the camera loved her, no one else could compare. Despite endless Hollywood rumors about Marilyn Monroe's on-set romances, Richard Widmark was quick to set the record straight. "Not with me," he once said. She didn't even flirt. By 1954, he reunited with Robert Wagner, this time alongside the great Spencer Tracy in Broken Lance, a powerful Western drama that would also mark the end of his 7-year contract with 20th Century Fox. Now 40 years old, Richard felt it was time for a change. He was tired of jumping from one set to another, working non-stop, and wanted more control over his career and his life. His daughter, Anne, would later reveal that her father was always a family man at heart, happiest when spending quiet evenings at their ranch in the peaceful San Fernando Valley. Determined to take charge of his creative path, Richard founded his own production company, Heath Productions, named after Anne's middle name. But 1956 brought deep sorrow. Within just 1 year, he lost both his younger brother, Donald, and his beloved mother, Ethel May. The pain of those losses stayed with him forever. Though Richard rarely spoke about rivalries in public, Hollywood insiders and co-stars often whispered about the few actors who truly got under his skin. Whether it was because of their arrogance, laziness, or lack of professionalism, Richard had little patience for anyone who didn't treat acting as a craft worthy of respect. And according to those who knew him best, there were 5 actors he simply couldn't stand, no matter how big their names were. Number 1. Frank Sinatra. The chairman of the board might have charmed the world, but he didn't charm Richard Widmark. When they worked together on The Detective, 1968, the experience left Richard fuming. Sinatra's laid-back attitude, habit of showing up late, and insistence on wrapping scenes quickly with minimal rehearsal clashed completely with Widmark's disciplined, perfectionist nature. One crew member recalled, Richard thought Frank was all charisma, no commitment. To Widmark, acting was sacred. To Sinatra, it was just another gig. Number 2. Marlon Brando. Richard admired Brando's raw talent, even his brilliance, but couldn't tolerate his unpredictable, method-acting habits. Brando's refusal to memorize lines, constant improvisations, and chaotic behavior drove Widmark crazy. Though the two never worked directly together, Richard once remarked, "Some actors need chaos to create. I prefer focus." Many believed that line was a subtle jab aimed straight at Brando. Number 3. Tony Curtis. During the filming of The Long Ships, 1964, Widmark and Curtis shared the screen but not much else. Curtis's vanity and obsession with his appearance irritated Richard, who viewed acting as serious work, not a fashion show. Crew members said Curtis spent more time in the makeup chair than studying his lines. Richard didn't hate Tony for who he was, one assistant later said, but for who he pretended to be. To Widmark, Curtis was all style, no substance. Number 4. Robert Mitchum. Cool, charming, and effortlessly rebellious, Mitchum was Hollywood's king of nonchalance. But to Richard, that attitude came off as disrespectful. Mitchum often bragged about doing minimal prep for his roles, once saying, "I just show up, hit my mark, and say the lines." For Widmark, who treated every performance like a battle, that mindset was unforgivable. After watching Mitchum in one film, Richard reportedly muttered to a friend, "You don't coast through greatness." Number 5. Kirk Douglas. Perhaps the most surprising name on the list. Both men were fierce, intense, and larger than life, maybe too similar for comfort. Richard found Douglas overbearing, a scene stealer who always wanted the spotlight. His booming voice, grand gestures, and relentless energy often clashed with Widmark's more controlled presence. Rumor has it Richard once turned down a major role opposite Douglas, saying, "There's only room for one storm in a scene, and Kirk brings the whole hurricane." Despite these tensions, Richard Widmark remained the consummate professional. He never spoke ill of anyone publicly, never fueled gossip columns, and always kept his private opinions exactly where he believed they belonged, off the record. For him, the work was what mattered most, and that dedication earned him something far greater than fame, respect. Those who knew Richard Widmark best said he believed acting was more than a career, it was a responsibility. To him, every actor owed respect to the audience, to the script, and to their fellow performers. When someone disrespected that, whether out of arrogance or laziness, Richard took it personally. In 1957, he starred alongside Richard Basehart and June Lockhart in Time Limit. A year later, audiences saw him with Doris Day and Gig Young in The Tunnel of Love. That same year, he shared the screen with Robert Taylor and Patricia Owens in The Law and Jake Wade. By this point, Widmark wasn't just another Hollywood name, he was a star everyone recognized. When asked if fame had stolen his privacy, he calmly replied, "I don't care how well known an actor is. He can live a normal life if he wants to." In 1960, Richard took on the role of Jim Bowie in The Alamo, a John Wayne production. Interestingly, Wayne originally wanted him to play Colonel William Travis, telling him bluntly, "You're not big enough to play Jim Bowie." Richard simply smiled and replied, "I will be." And he was right. A year later, in 1961, he starred in Two Rode Together with James Stewart and Shirley Jones. Behind the scenes, the set was often tense as director John Ford and Stewart constantly argued, mostly about the old battered cowboy hat Stewart insisted on wearing in every Western. Despite the chaos, Shirley Jones later confessed that Richard Widmark was the only leading man she ever truly fell in love with. "He and Jimmy were both so kind and protective," she recalled. "Maybe that's why I loved him, because nothing ever happened." That same year, Widmark played the American prosecutor in the powerful courtroom drama Judgment at Nuremberg, acting alongside legends like Spencer Tracy and Burt Lancaster. Then, in 1962, he joined an all-star cast in How the West Was Won, appearing alongside John Wayne, James Stewart, Gregory Peck, Debbie Reynolds, Carol Baker, and Henry Fonda. With a massive $15 million budget, the film became a blockbuster, grossing over $50 million and solidifying Widmark's place among Hollywood's elite. By 1964, Richard and his wife Jean had settled into a peaceful life on their 20-acre estate in Connecticut. But he wasn't done with Hollywood just yet. In 1966, he returned to the screen in the Civil War drama Alvarez Kelly with William Holden and Janice Rule, followed by The Way West in 1967, where he reunited with Robert Mitchum and Kirk Douglas, two men he famously didn't get along with. Not long after, tragedy struck again. Just 2 years after Alvarez Kelly, Richard received the devastating news that his father, Carl, had passed away in New Orleans at the age of 70. Still, Richard continued to work, appearing in Murder on the Orient Express, 1974, alongside Lauren Bacall and an all-star cast, and later in Hanky Panky, 1982, directed by his friend Sidney Poitier and co-starring Gene Wilder and Gilda Radner. By 1987, at 72 years old, Richard admitted the magic of movie-making had faded. "I've realized in my old age that making movies just irritates me," he said with a wry smile. "I've only got a few years left, and I don't want to spend 12 hours on set just to shoot 2 minutes of film." Over his legendary career, he appeared in more than 70 movies, too many to name, though he remained best known for his unforgettable Western roles. That same year, in an interview with Parade magazine, he shared a few bizarre encounters with fans. "Once, a woman slapped me in the street and called me a little squirt," he laughed. "Another time, a big guy knocked me right out of my chair at a restaurant." When asked if he was smart with money, unlike many stars who lost it all, Richard simply joked, "No, I'm just cheap." In February 1990, at age 75, Widmark received one of his greatest honors, the D.W. Griffith Lifetime Achievement Award. The award was presented by his dear friend Sidney Poitier. Richard was deeply touched and said, "Sid, I can't believe you came all the way to California just for this." Poitier smiled and replied, "For you, Dick, I would have walked." But that same year, his life changed forever. His beloved wife, Jean, was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. Richard quietly stepped away from acting to care for her full-time, returning only once, in 1991's True Colors, to fulfill a final commitment. The next 7 years were heartbreaking for Richard and their daughter, and as they watched Jean slowly fade away. On March 2, 1997, Jean Widmark passed away in Santa Barbara, California. Heartbroken, Richard sold their cherished 80-acre ranch in Hidden Valley soon after. "Without her," he said, "it just didn't feel like home anymore." 2.5 years later, on September 27, 1999, Richard, then 84, married actress Susan Blanchard, a longtime family friend. He said Susan had always been kind to Jean, and together, they settled in Roxbury, Connecticut. In 2002, Richard was inducted into the National Cowboy Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City, a fitting tribute to a man who had defined the Western hero for generations. By 2007, his health began to decline. A fractured vertebra made life difficult, but Richard remained the same humble, gentle soul he had always been. On March 24, 2008, at the age of 93, Richard Widmark passed away peacefully at his home in Roxbury. Friends and family remembered him not just as a Hollywood legend, but as a kind, principled man who lived, and left, quietly with grace.